It wasn't an algorithm. You need to understand that first. The images and sounds you were shown, the cryptic numbers that appeared in your recommendations, that was a signal, a tuning fork resonating with something already inside of you. You were chosen because you are one of the few who senses that the reality we see is just a fraction of the whole story, a beautiful, hypnotic, but fragmented echo. For months, you've been collecting those echoes, feeling their power without understanding the source. Consider this video the first translation of that source. This is not another theory or a guess. This is the blueprint, the very architecture of the philosophy you've been subconsciously drawn to. What you are about to see is the key that elevates you from a mere spectator of the mystery to an active participant in its unfolding. The puzzle pieces are in your hands. Now, let's begin to assemble them.
There are sentences that cannot be comprehended and internalized, not for want of words or meaning, but because their very architecture is a closed loop, a breath that folds back into itself before it can escape. They are formulas that lead nowhere, yet they persist, animated by their own impossibility, circling like planets locked in an orbit that has no sun. Picture a library with no exits. Its walls are built not of stone, but of volumes that fold into one another, each sentence pointing to the next, each definition opening a door that leads only back to the room you began in. This is the atlas of contradictory statements, a place that springs into existence the moment someone tries to map it, and you are already inside. You have been from the first word. Some of these statements are born from logical paradoxes. Others belong to theology or esotericism, where the ineffable disguises itself as language, pretending with a kind of melancholy audacity that it can be spoken. And then there are those that masquerade as questions while expecting no answer from you whatsoever. Who creates the creator? Where does time go when it doesn't pass? What remains of a thought that was never fully thought? Every culture has bequeathed a few of these to posterity, the fruits of the intellectual labor of those who glimpsed the limit and carved it into words. The Greeks had Achilles and the tortoise, the Vedic Indians their proto-koans, the Kabbalists, combinations of letters no single intellect could entirely contain. All of them, despite their distances in time and tongue, spoke of the same abyss, the impossibility of closing the circle of meaning without sacrificing the very sign that holds it open. Contradictory statements are not the sole province of philosophy. They live also in code, in algorithms, in circuits oscillating between 1 and 0 without ever deciding. Computer scientists call them infinite loops, but the distance between that term and saying Amen is not so great as it appears. Both are formulas that attempt to delimit eternity, one through silicon, the other through faith. There is something profoundly human in the compulsion to craft sentences that cannot be grasped. Perhaps it is a way to contain the infinite without looking at it directly. Or perhaps, and this would be more honest, it is a way of postponing the admission that every language, when pushed far enough, implodes. Irony is inevitable here. Picture a medieval philosopher laboring to define the undefinable, while the ink he intends to use to write down this future definition rebelliously curdles into blots on the parchment. Or a modern logician attempting to prove that language can say everything, only to discover that his theorem, too, is a sentence about itself. Godel would smile if he had time for jokes. Each time a thought attempts to capture itself, it slips away. Each time a mind tries to close the circle, a remainder appears, a small error, a vibration in the system. It is precisely there, in that vibration, in that note which refuses to resolve yet never stops resonating, that the contradictory statement lives and breathes. Some have tried to catalog these vibrations. Bertrand Russell, with the precision of a cartographer, drew lines through the chaos of logic, but the lines curved back upon themselves. Wittgenstein attempted to define the boundaries of the sayable and exile the rest to silence, only to discover that silence too is a form of language. Yet both of them, perhaps unwittingly, helped sketch the first borders of this atlas, a territory that cannot be possessed, only intuited. The medieval mystics, without knowing it, worked on the same map, though their instruments were of a different kind. Their formulas were not designed to explain, but to exhaust the mind, to carry it to the precise point where language collapses under its own weight. No way leads to God except the way that leads nowhere, wrote Meister Eckhart. It is a perfect contradictory statement. It opens and closes in the same instant, like a breath that is neither inhalation nor exhalation, but suspension. And you, the listener, are not exempt. Your very attempt to understand is already woven into the paradox. To read a text like this is to accept being lost in a language that has no intention of leading you to an endpoint, only of showing you the curvature of the path. The atlas is not consulted to find answers, but to remember that questions carry souls of their own. Consider, if every word strains toward meaning, the contradictory statement is the deviation that steals it before it arrives. It is the knot that thought cannot untie, because the knot is thought itself. When language attempts to explain itself, it becomes a labyrinth, and logic its minotaur. There is an ancient image that resurfaces whenever such structures are invoked: the Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail. But it is not merely a symbol of eternity, it is also the figure of linguistic self-consumption, of discourse eating itself alive. Every time you say I, you step into an insoluble statement, because the subject who speaks is also the object spoken of. In esoteric traditions, it is said that absolute truth cannot be uttered, because every word separates it from itself. Which leaves one to ask, what then remains to be said? Perhaps precisely this, the tension itself, the endless, undefeated attempt to speak the unspeakable. The Atlas is not a catalog of answers, but a museum of the impossible, where each sentence on display is a fragment of consciousness that has arrived at the edge of self-explanation and found itself unable to step across. At rare moments, one of these statements seems to open for a breath, a fissure in the mind, a point where everything seems to align. Then it closes again, and you find yourself back where you began. But the moment leaves a residue, a persistent light. It is that residue that keeps language alive. Not clarity, but doubt. Not resolution, but the vibration that precedes it. The Atlas, after all, is not a closed book. It is a device that rewrites itself each time someone dares to utter a sentence without knowing where it will end. Perhaps time itself is the ultimate contradictory statement. Each moment vows to reach resolution in the successor, yet that successor never truly comes to pass, save as yet another unresolved enigma. And so here we are, suspended between a perhaps and an already, in this space we call language. Not to find the answer, but to gently touch the border of its absence. Don't worry if you don't understand everything. No one can. And that is precisely how language reminds you it's alive. See you in the next episode.